will be talking about the Tran-SET project ABQ Streets project, creating alternative residential street designs. Greg Rowengold, who was at UNM, is now at University of Vermont, is the PI on this project, and I will be covering the presentation for him. I'm co-PI and, again, professor in the Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering Department at UNM. So the purpose of this research project is to rethink our local residential streets. So a lot of attention goes towards streets that look like this on the left, our highways, our arterials, or our collectors. That's where a lot of traffic issues occur, congestion. That's where a lot of our traffic safety issues are. So a lot of research focuses on these types of roads, and a lot of resources go towards these types of roads. However, our local roads have been pretty much neglected for decades, even probably close to a century. Our design decisions have looked exactly the same for our local roads. In the preceding decades, though, there's been a lot of advancements in terms of materials, in terms of geometric design, different traffic calming strategies. So that's the purpose of this work, to rethink what our local streets look like. This is a big issue just based on the size of the local street network. So in Albuquerque, New Mexico, about 75% of our roadways are local residential streets. And nationwide, the number is about 71% of urban roadways are local streets. So a huge percentage of our system consists of these small, neglected roadways. In Albuquerque, we've got about 1,800 miles of these roadways. So even if we can find some small benefits to rethinking our local street design, they can have huge implications when we're thinking about our entire systems. So again, the purpose is to rethink kind of this top picture, the way that we've done it for decades, and there's different paving materials, street trees, different configurations of our roadways, all kinds of different things that we can be thinking about when we work on our local streets. For this project specifically, we're focused on retrofits. So a lot of residential areas have already been built. We're not thinking about tearing down houses and moving things. We're thinking just simply about retrofitting our existing streets. So what we did for this project is we first completed a comprehensive literature review, looking at different design guidelines and research from across the country and around the world. What are other people doing for their local streets? We summarized all the different design elements that we found and listed all the costs and all the benefits of those different design elements. We then took those design elements and broke them up into alternatives, clustering these elements together. We next went out into a neighborhood in Albuquerque. We selected a neighborhood that was interested in talking about retrofitting their local streets. And we applied these alternatives to that neighborhood. So how much, for this neighborhood, how much would it cost to try these different alternatives? What kind of benefits could we expect? Final step was to monetize all those costs and all those benefits and then annualize them so that we can compare, see, do these benefits that we're going to accrue outweigh the costs. So as we were moving through this project, we were focused on a few different categories of outcomes. So will these changes to our local streets impact travel behavior? Will it get more people out walking or biking or using transit? What will be the benefits or costs of that? We were also focused on traffic flow, not a lot of congestion issues within our neighborhoods, but we did want to keep that in mind and make sure we weren't causing any other issues that weren't existing before. Traffic safety, so this was a big one. This is where we saw a lot of benefits. I'll give you a sneak preview here. The neighborhood that we chose had 17 motor vehicle crashes per year. So some of these changes can have really big impacts in terms of traffic safety. We're also looking at the impacts on crime, so things like street lighting, how would that reduce crime in these neighborhoods, and then environmental impacts. So this is Greg's forte. I mostly focus on traffic safety. I'm a safety guy, but Greg is focusing on the environmental impacts, specifically urban heat and stormwater management. So those are the outcomes that we were thinking of as we were picking out our different design alternatives. The design factors that we were looking at fell into a few different categories. So we're looking at network connectivity. If we have cul-de-sacs within our neighborhoods, how might we be able to connect those to the wider network? Looking at parking, do we have on-street? Do we have curb cuts? Do we have parking in the back, in alleys? Geometric design, mostly looking at lane widths. Stormwater management, can we manage stormwater on site within these neighborhoods instead of building heavy infrastructure to move the stormwater somewhere else? Lighting, different pavements and materials, we'll talk more about those. There's some interesting developments there. Adding traffic calming, traffic control, so looking at should we have stop controlled intersections, yield controlled, traffic circles, things like that, and then sidewalk and bike facilities. Okay, so onto our findings. For our literature review, we found 125 different pieces of research, government reports, and design guidelines that were looking at local street design. And these were from across the country and around the world. And from all of these different resources, we pulled out 47 different design elements that we can use on our streets. I won't go into all of those, but I'll give you just a kind of a flavor of the type of thing that we were looking at. So this one is kind of our cheap and easy solution, but still effective. So looking at just putting paint down on the roadway. If you have cut through roadway in your neighborhood, if you want to slow traffic down, just putting some paint down can be effective at calming that traffic. What impact would that have on traffic safety? Would that get more people out walking and biking if vehicles are slowing down? Things like that. Getting a little bit more complex, a little more expensive, looking at actually moving curb, adding in traffic circles instead of just having stop signs throughout the neighborhood. Maybe we want to cut through traffic completely through our neighborhood, so we can put a diverter, stops motor vehicle traffic, but still allows pedestrians and bicyclists. So looking at these types of things in terms of safety, travel behavior, so on and so forth. Now we're moving into some of the more environmentally oriented treatments. So this can calm traffic, adding these planter strips or rain gardens can still calm traffic, but now we're also going to be able to deal with stormwater on site here. Some of the most interesting design elements that we came upon were focused on kind of materials and pavements. So this is a sealant that gets applied to asphalt to make it white. And the main benefit here is reducing urban heat. So much of the country has been hit with a heat wave the last couple of weeks. We see California really struggling to allow everybody to run their AC. So maybe putting down this white asphalt sealant would reduce temperatures enough, have the benefit of reduced energy consumption. Maybe those benefits would outweigh the cost of putting down this sealant. So there's not a lot of examples of folks doing this. I think they did it in LA, but we're working right now to figure out what's the cost of installation, materials, how long will this last, and what would the benefits be in terms of environmental and energy consumption. Another one would be permeable pavement. So again, instead of building infrastructure to move stormwater and deal with it somewhere else, can we just deal with it right there in the neighborhood? Then we looked at also kind of complete rethinks of the configuration of our roadways. So maybe we can add wider sidewalks, add separation, tighten the street. If we have on-street parking, maybe we can create kind of this traffic calming situation by using that on-street parking. And then we also did propose a few radical changes. So this is called a Woonerf. It's a Dutch design, and it combines a lot of these different aspects. So geometric design, adding bollards, street trees, street furniture, things like that, different pavement materials. So adding a lot of these design elements into a kind of radical alternative. So we compiled all those design elements. We figured out costs, maintenance costs and lifespan, and then also the benefits of those. We monetized all of that and annualized it so that we could compare. We broke those apart into alternatives. So the different alternatives were first, and we always did this when I was working professionally, but cheap alternative. So mostly just using paint, putting down double yellows, putting down markings to designate on-street parking, crosswalks, stop bars, things like that. The next one was traffic circles, so focusing on intersections, and street trees. And there was no room to put the street trees, so we also added curb extensions and put the street trees in there. We looked at the different materials that I mentioned. Then we talked about moving curb, which would be a bit more expensive, and then we looked at a radical alternative. So the neighborhood that we looked at is in southeast Albuquerque. It's called Fair West. There's political buy-in for this. There's interest in making sure this neighborhood gets enough investment. And also we're working with the neighborhood association. They're interested in rethinking their neighborhood as well. So this is what the neighborhood looks like. Pretty typical neighborhood, surrounded by some arterials and collectors, but all local residential streets within the neighborhood. It's a park right in the middle. There's not a lot of cut-through traffic across these collectors and arterials on the boundaries. So we first looked at existing conditions, about 50,000 linear feet of roadways, 64 intersections, 40 feet of right-of-way outside of sidewalk to outside of sidewalk, and 30 feet of asphalt. We looked at how much crime is occurring in these neighborhoods, how many crashes are occurring from NMDOT data. And then this is an example of that first cheap alternative. So taking this wide asphalt strip, you can imagine people speeding up and down here, just tightening it up a bit more by designating those lane widths, adding stop bars, crosswalks at the intersections. Okay, so on to some results here. This is our first, what we call the cheap alternative, just using paint. So you can see double stripes, about 100,000 linear feet throughout the neighborhood, crosswalks, 4 at each intersection, so on and so forth. We assumed that the lifespan was 3 years for this. Inflation rate was 1%, so our annualized costs are about $136,000. We had 17 crashes, 8 injury, 9 property damage only for a 3-year, or sorry, annually, and that was a 3-year average. We used FHWA crash modification factors and FHWA average cost of crashes to estimate that we would get about $270,000 in benefits by reducing these crashes annually. So you can see the benefits are far outweigh those costs of doing this. Looking at some of the expensive ones, more cost up front for adding traffic circles, but the lifespan is longer, so the actual annualized cost is pretty low. We don't have as many crashes happening at intersections, but we still get a fair amount of benefits from this. So $70,000 of annual benefits compared to $3,000 annual costs. Looking at lighting, we factored in cost of the poles, cost of the lights, cost of electricity, and it would be about $32,000 annually in costs. We only looked at crashes that are happening at night. We estimated about $65,000 in reduced crashes, and then we also looked at crime, estimated about $24,000 reduced crime. That brings us to about $90,000. So again, kind of the takeaway here, and I won't go through all the alternatives, but the takeaway is that a lot of these alternatives are going to, the benefits are going to far outweigh the costs. Next steps are we're going to go to the neighborhood association and actually work with some of these folks and see, do residents like these different alternatives? Would they be willing to see these implemented in their neighborhood? So thank you very much for your attention. I think we have a few minutes for questions if anybody has any.
I had a question, Nick. I was just wondering if you had coordinated at all with the city yet to see about implementation of some of these. Some of the things you're showing would be very helpful for them to comply with the Complete Streets ordinance, so they might be willing to listen.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of momentum in this way, I think. Complete Streets, also Albuquerque, year and a half ago or so became Vision Zero city. So there's a lot of momentum for this type of thing. Greg, when he was working on this project, he kind of took that top-down approach, trying to work with the city. He didn't get a lot of traction taking that approach. So I've been taking the bottom-up approach, working with the neighborhood association. We're hoping that if we can get their buy-in, then we can work our way up to a city councilman and then up to different city departments. So no buy-in yet, but we're trying to do this bottom-up approach. And thank you. Good question.
Interesting. Thank you.
This is Eric Calavota with Louisiana DOT. In one of your slides, initial slides, you had the mileage or the linear feet of local roads, and you had something called if I read it correctly, a copper. What
yes. So that was, and I can share that again really quickly. So copper is one of the roads that runs through the neighborhood. It's still technically, well, you can see it here, it's still technically considered a local road, but this is one of the only ones that actually cuts through the neighborhood. And this one was actually retrofitted a few years ago, so it already has a few traffic circles, it already has some striping on it, it's got shared lane markings as well. So I just wanted to break that one out, and we didn't account for that one. Like when we were adding in traffic circles, we didn't factor in that we would add any traffic circles on copper because they already exist there. So just wanted to differentiate that one. Sorry about not mentioning that before.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was a particular type of road or that's the name of a road. Okay, I got it now. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yep. That's just a specific roadway. I think we have maybe one more minute if there's one more question.